Ever wonder how a cup of coffee connects to something like, say, the French Revolution?
Or even the global economy.
We're taking a deep dive into Coffee, the Epic of a Commodity by Heinrich Edward Jacob.
We'll uncover how this beverage went from those legendary Ethiopian goats to a global phenomenon.
A global phenomenon with some pretty surprising historical ties.
What I find fascinating about Jacob's work is how he captures coffee as this driving force in history.
It's like he saw coffee as more than just a drink, right?
Absolutely, he argues that coffee actively shaped civilizations.
He makes the case that it deserves its own epic tale. But before we get to coffee's world domination...
World domination might be a bit strong, but it certainly had a significant impact.
You're right. Maybe not quite world domination, but definitely a powerful force. Let's rewind to the very beginning. What's the story with those goats and their unexpected energy boost?
Ah, yes. The legendary goats. The traditional origin story places us in the Ethiopian highlands with a goat herd. He notices his flock behaving unusually energetic, even frantic, after nibbling berries from a specific shrub.
So basically, the goat herd stumbles upon nature's version of an all-nighter.
You could say that. This, according to legend, was humanity's first encounter with coffee.
Okay, so wired goats, got it. But how did people go from, whoa, look at those goats, to actually brewing a drink?
Well, those berries were brought to the monks at a nearby monastery, the Sheodid Monastery. And these monks, dedicated to their nightly prayers, were intrigued by the berries' potential to combat drowsiness.
Makes sense. Long nights of prayer, you need something to keep you going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They brewed a drink, likely quite bitter at first, hoping it would help them stay awake during their devotions.
So coffee. The original study buddy.
There you go, the original study buddy.
But it seems like it took a while for coffee to catch on outside of this region. What was the journey like from there?
You see, for centuries, coffee remained pretty much within the realm of the Middle East and Islamic societies.
It was a while before it made its way to Europe.
When it finally arrived in Europe, it wasn't just about taste. Coffee was seen as a challenge to the long-held dominance of alcohol, especially wine.
Why was coffee perceived as such a threat to wine? Wine was so ingrained in European culture at that time.
Exactly. You have to remember, wine was deeply ingrained in European culture, associated with relaxation, socializing, even religious rituals. Think of Bacchus, the Roman god of wine representing festivity, abandon.
And coffee was like the opposite of that.
In a way, yes. Coffee, on the other hand, was this newcomer shrouded in exoticism, promising wakefulness and focus, almost the anti-wine.
Anti-wine, I like that. And this anti-wine emerges just as Europe is undergoing significant intellectual and social change with the Enlightenment. Was there a connection there?
Absolutely. Coffee became associated with clarity of thought, rational discourse, the very antithesis of wine's intoxicating effects.
So as Europe embraced new ideas, coffee was there to fuel the movement.
You could say it became the fuel of the Enlightenment.
I like it. So where did all this intellectual buzz take place?
Coffee houses. These vibrant hubs popped up in cities across Europe, becoming centers for conversation, debate, and of course, coffee.
Ah, the original coffee shop.
They became so central to intellectual life that they even earned the nickname penny universities.
Penny universities, why is that?
Because, for the price of a cup of coffee, anyone could join in on the stimulating discussions.
That's fascinating, like the original social media platforms, but with less doom scrolling and more actual discourse. But were these coffee houses similar to what we know today?
They were lively gathering places, much like cafes today, but they served a much deeper purpose. Think of them as the public forums of their time, where news was shared, ideas were debated, social connections were forged.
From those Ethiopian monks seeking alertness to these bustling European coffee houses, it seems coffee has always had this social element to it.
It's a common thread throughout its history, for sure.
But its influence wasn't limited to Europe, right? What was coffee's impact on the Islamic world?
In the Islamic world, coffee was dubbed the wine of Islam, which is interesting because coffee's stimulating effects challenged the Islamic prohibition on alcohol.
That must have led to some lively theological debates.
Oh, absolutely. You had these contrasting views.
Yeah.
A divine gift by some, a potential vice by others, all thanks to coffee.
It makes you wonder, did these debates help or hinder its spread?
Even with opposition, coffee's popularity only grew. Take the case of Karabey, the viceroy of Mecca in the 16th century.
What did he do?
He tried to ban coffee, claiming it fueled dissent and sleeplessness. But his efforts backfired.
That makes sense. It's like that saying, forbidden fruit tastes the sweetest. Attempts to suppress it probably just made it even more desirable. So we've got coffee spreading like wildfire through Europe and the Middle East, but how did it make the jump to the Americas?
That's a tale of ambition, adventure, and a bit of luck. It involves a French naval officer named Gabriel Mathieu Declue and his mission to bring coffee to the Caribbean.
Okay, I'm ready for the story. What lengths did this guy go to for his cup of joe?
Imagine this: a perilous journey across the Atlantic Ocean in the 1720s. A precious coffee seedling carefully guarded against storms, pirates, even jealous rivals. Declue, determined to bring coffee cultivation to the French colonies, risked it all for those tiny beans.
Wow. And to think, this one little plant was poised to transform the entire coffee industry. What was the significance of this risky venture?
Up until that point, coffee was largely sourced from the Middle East, controlled by Arab traders.
This was a big deal.
Declue's successful transplant of that single seedling to Martinique marked a turning point. It paved the way for coffee plantations to flourish across the Americas, Brazil in particular.
That's incredible. This single act helped shift the balance of power in the coffee trade. But this expansion came at a cost, didn't it?
Sadly, yes. The rise of coffee plantations in the Americas, particularly Brazil, was intrinsically linked to a tragic chapter in history: the exploitation of slave labor on a massive scale.
A sobering reminder that even something as commonplace as coffee carries with it a complex and often difficult past. But how did Brazil, in particular, become almost synonymous with coffee production?
Brazil had the perfect conditions for large-scale coffee cultivation. The climate, the land, and tragically the readily available source of cheap labor due to the transatlantic slave trade. As global demand for coffee surged in the 19th century, Brazil stepped in to fill the void, becoming the world's dominant coffee supplier.
It's incredible how a single crop reshaped an entire nation's landscape, economy, and social fabric. This reliance on coffee, though, it must have come with its own set of risks, right?
You're absolutely right. Tying your fortunes to a single commodity is inherently risky, no matter how in demand it might be, and Brazil would soon learn that lesson the hard way.
So we've got Brazil, this coffee-producing powerhouse, but as you were saying, facing some pretty big risks by relying so heavily on just one crop.
Exactly. And as you can imagine, tying your economy to the global coffee market is a bit of a roller coaster ride. When prices plummeted due to oversupply, Brazil's coffee industry really felt the heat.
And this is where that whole burning coffee thing comes in, right?
Hey.
It's hard to imagine a more drastic measure.
It does sound counterintuitive, doesn't it? But that's precisely what happened.
They actually burned coffee.
They did. Certain influential figures in Brazil's coffee industry saw burning excess beans as a way to artificially control the supply and drive those prices back up.
So they were essentially playing chicken with the global coffee market, hoping to come out on top. What were the ramifications of a strategy like that?
Well, the consequences were far-reaching and multifaceted. On an ethical level, intentionally destroying a valuable commodity, one as essential as coffee, it raised serious concerns.
I can see why.
The image of vast quantities of coffee beans going up in flames, all to protect the interests of a select few, while many struggled to even afford basic necessities. It's a stark illustration of the ethical dilemmas tied to market manipulation.
It's a haunting image, to say the least. But beyond the ethical implications, there had to be broader economic and maybe even environmental consequences as well. Did those burnings have any lasting impact on the industry?
Absolutely. The practice was unsustainable, and ultimately it destabilized the market in the long run, and the environmental impact of those burnings was significant.
Makes sense. They were literally burning resources.
Jacob himself witnessed this firsthand and recounts the acrid smoke filling the sky, a testament to the environmental cost of such practices.
It seems like a textbook case of short-sighted decision-making in a way. But burning coffee wasn't the only strategy Brazil employed to stabilize the market, was it?
No, you're right. They also tried a government-led intervention called valorization.
Valorization, what is that?
Essentially, this involved the government buying up excess coffee, stockpiling it, and even withholding it from the market to create artificial scarcity.
So it's like they were taking a page out of OPEC's playbook, but with coffee instead of oil. Did this valorization approach yield any more sustainable results?
It offered some temporary price stability, but valorization had its own set of drawbacks. For one thing, it created a system that was vulnerable to corruption and was a constant balancing act, trying to appease coffee producers while navigating the complexities of global supply and demand.
All this while the world was becoming more and more reliant on its coffee fix. It's mind-boggling how a simple beverage could command such influence. But even with the market manipulation and the fluctuating prices, Wouldn't coffee eventually become accessible to more than just the elite?
It did. But the journey from a luxury item to an everyday staple was shaped by a confluence of factors. Technological advancements played a crucial role.
In what way?
Well, think about the invention of vacuum packaging. This allowed for coffee to be shipped and stored for longer periods, which opened up new markets and made it more readily available.
That's a game changer. Suddenly, even those far from coffee-producing regions could enjoy a fresh cup. Were there other innovations that helped propel coffee into the mainstream?
The rise of instant coffee in the mid-20th century, while perhaps not as celebrated by coffee connoisseurs, was a pivotal moment in expanding coffee's reach.
Because it was cheaper and easier.
Exactly. It provided a quick and convenient way to get your caffeine fix, which further democratized coffee consumption.
Convenience often trumps everything else. It's interesting how you see these parallel trends emerge across different industries. We see this with the rise of fast food as well. It's like making something readily available often dictates how it's consumed. But what about the coffee itself? Did the taste evolve along with these technological advancements and changing consumption habits?
You've hit on a crucial aspect of coffee's transformation. The development of various roasting techniques, ranging from light to dark roasts, created a spectrum of flavors and aromas, catering to diverse palates.
So more options for everyone.
This shift from what was likely a more bitter brew of those early Ethiopian monks to the nuanced flavors we associate with coffee today was instrumental in its global appeal.
It's like coffee went from a one-size-fits-all drink to a customizable experience with something for everyone. It's no wonder it became such a global phenomenon. It had something for everyone and was becoming increasingly accessible. But as we've been discussing, it's more than just the taste and the caffeine kick. There's a whole social and cultural aspect to coffee that's evolved as well.
Precisely. The social rituals associated with coffee have become deeply ingrained in our daily routines, further solidifying its place in modern life.
Like going to a coffee shop to catch up with a friend or just relax.
Exactly. From the leisurely coffee breaks in European cafes to the on-the-go coffee culture of many urban centers, these rituals are testaments to coffee's cultural significance.
It's remarkable how a drink can transcend its basic function and become so deeply intertwined with our social fabric, our daily rituals, even our identities in some ways. It's clear that coffee has become this integral part of our cultures and our routines, but it makes you wonder, after uncovering its complex and sometimes troubling past, what's next for this ubiquitous beverage?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? As we've seen, the coffee industry's journey has been marked by both innovation and exploitation, periods of boom and bust.
Right, it's had its ups and downs, that's for sure.
And I think now, perhaps more than ever, we need to be carefully considering the future of coffee production and consumption.
Especially given what we've learned about those less than sustainable practices like the coffee burnings we talked about and those ethical dilemmas surrounding labor practices. So how do we ensure a more equitable and sustainable future for coffee? Where do we even begin?
Well, it's a multifaceted challenge, to be sure, and there's no easy fix. But there are encouraging signs. Many within the industry are exploring innovative approaches to address these very issues.
Like what? What kind of innovations are we talking about?
One key area is this idea of promoting crop diversification.
So not just relying on coffee as the only crop.
Exactly. It reduces that reliance on coffee as a single crop, which, as we saw with Brazil, can make entire economies vulnerable to these market fluctuations. Diversification helps create a more resilient and sustainable agricultural system.
So not putting all our coffee beans in one basket, so to speak.
Yeah.
That makes sense. What else is being done?
Supporting small-scale farmers is crucial.
Those are really the heart of the industry.
By ensuring that these farmers receive fair prices for their beans and have access to resources and training on sustainable farming practices, we can really empower them.
To have more control over their livelihoods.
Exactly, and to be stewards of the land and ensure the long-term viability of coffee production.
That seems essential. Empowering those who are actually growing and harvesting the coffee beans seems like a logical step toward a more equitable industry.
I agree.
Are there other ways that consumers, everyday coffee drinkers, can contribute to a more ethical and sustainable coffee future?
Absolutely. Consumer choices have immense power. By seeking out brands that prioritize fair trade practices, supporting those sustainable farming initiatives, and simply being more informed about where our coffee comes from, we become active participants in shaping the future of the industry.
It's like every cup becomes a vote for the kind of coffee industry we want to support.
I like that.
It's empowering to know that we as consumers can make a difference.
Every choice, no matter how small, sends a ripple effect through this global coffee trade. It's about connecting our consumption to the larger context: production, ethics, sustainability.
This deep dive into Heinrich Edward Jacobs' coffee, the epic of a commodity, has been really eye-opening. We've gone from those curious goats in Ethiopia to coffee houses buzzing with intellectual discourse. From the heights of market manipulation to this hopeful potential for a more sustainable and equitable future.
Quite a journey.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's clear that this beverage, this drink that we encounter every day, has a far more complex and far more fascinating history than we often realize.
Jacobs' work really encourages us to see coffee not just as a drink, but as a lens through which we can explore history, economics, even human nature.
It's a reminder that even the seemingly mundane aspects of our lives are connected to these larger, intricate systems.
Exactly. And those connections matter.
They really do. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of coffee. It's been a pleasure exploring this epic story with you.
The pleasure was all mine. It's always a treat to talk coffee.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to think differently about that next cup of coffee. Until next time.